Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're going to do something a little different today. We're having a discussion about AI, its implications, ethical considerations, and what the future might hold. And we brought back a really exciting guest who was on one of our shows last fall, Joyce Chung. Joyce and I have slightly opposing views on some of this. I think we both think there's some potential, but I absolutely think there are some moments of skepticism that I have about AI, I think, are also something we want to talk about. So welcome, Joyce. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, and I look forward to a nice debate. I don't even know if we're going to disagree. I think it speaks to the larger question that everybody's asking about AI, and there is a lot of debate going on, so it's a very timely discussion to be had.
You're so right, and what a great way to kick us off, because I think this is exactly the question. Let's start with the big picture, and then we'll get into some of the strategy and implementation and operational questions. Gen AI has been on everyone's radar for 2 years, ever since OpenAI came out with its ChatGPT public product. How do you see generative AI impacting global economic growth over the next decade?
McKinsey did a study that Gen AI could add $2.6 to $4.4 trillion annually to the global economy. And if you think about what the impact could be, higher productivity, increased customer satisfaction, faster time to market innovations, there's just a lot that it offers. In fact, just another stat to throw at you, 75% of the value that generative AI offers will fall into 4 areas. And this is per McKinsey. It would be customer operations, by problem solving, by scalability and productivity, marketing and sales, whether it be personalized experiences and services that enhance learning moments, software engineering, problem solving innovation, and R&D. Those are the big 4 that everybody's talking about. And I think one point that I'm very curious to get your point of view on is that I don't believe that AI will be a replacement to human capabilities. It'll augment those capabilities with collaborative tools that amplify our potential. And I'd love to just kick it off and just get your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So I have read that study. It's an oft-cited one. What I find interesting is all of the most ambitious numbers about AI come from consulting firms, or Goldman has a huge report out here too. These are entities that really will benefit if those numbers are at the very high end of the range. But I don't think that they are necessarily grounded in reality. I think that optimism is fine. But when you say projected economic impact, I'm also going to questions like, what about the inefficiencies of correcting data? There's obviously still accuracy problems, even in the latest version of ChatGPT, and certainly in some of the other tools. So what about the questions about, new jobs, old jobs, firing people, hiring new folks to replace the work that used to be done? All of that is happening, especially here in tech companies already. But one of the things that makes me hesitant when I look at that is if that data was coming from Pew or Brookings or even the US government or state of California, state of Texas, doesn't have to be a Democratic state, but someone that is less beholden to the results of those numbers being on the very high side, I think I would have more confidence in them.
I would argue that consulting firms have lost a lot of money with AI being at the forefront. It used to be where clients had no idea where to start. It may be imperfect. Who knows? It may be bad data, but at least it's a place to start. And a lot of these firms have lost a lot of people over the past 2 years. We don't read about it because they hire a lot of these consultants on a yearly basis on contract versus salaried. But there's a lot of intelligence that's going to be given to ChatGPT and generative AI, and it's falling away from a lot of thought leaders. I mean, who knows? Strategy as we know it could be dead. I know that's a provocative point, but that's kind of the fear. Ernst & Young did a study that 75% of workers are concerned that AI will make their jobs obsolete. And it's a fear that I think people in consulting do have. So that's an interesting point of view that you have about it actually benefiting consulting firms.
There's so much in what you're saying. There are also some studies out there that are already talking about the fact that whether it's McKinsey or some of the other big consulting firms, they're also cutting their hiring. So yes, you're right. Maybe some of the business is falling away, but the efficiency of those businesses is also improving. They're cutting their overhead. I think it's also true that, yeah, there are some starting points that you can get. The use cases for AI, I think, really matter. For example, if you are using it for ideation, or you and I have talked about this kind of offline that sometimes it's really helpful if you're, building a case or something to understand the weak points, right? I think we've both used it in that capacity. It's actually pretty helpful for that. Unhelpful when it comes to real research, because I've spent a lot of time on this because I was testing it out after, some of our conversations about this over the past year. And I find it to be incredibly inaccurate when it comes to validating research. So it gives me statistics and reports that I'm super excited about. And as I dig into them, I'm unable to validate them. One of the things I found more interesting is I think in a search context, Perplexity and even Google seem to actually be improving their outputs. But what I have questions about is it's difficult to know if you're getting the best answer. So if the hierarchy, is this answer right? Is it the best answer? Were there other answers? It's a really interesting question, in my opinion, of volume in search, because if you go to Google and you just look at all the links, it's effectively useless. I can't remember the last time I clicked on something, which is going to make all of our SEO friends really sad. But I think that's true for most people from the data that I see. And at the same time, if you give me only one answer, I have to have almost perfect confidence that the tool gave me the best answer. That's how I'm looking at that piece of it.
It's a fact that AI results in 40% fewer innovative ideas. So when it comes to original thinking, when it comes to really understanding data and giving research back that's valid, I would say that's a weak point. What AI can do is analyze massive data sets to generate solutions, but there's still a lot of issues with that. I think that enhanced creativity is the biggest benefit right now. That means automating repetitive tasks and enabling the rapid prototyping of new content and ideas. And what it does is it democratizes a lot of that creativity. And so who knows, maybe people can then do more high level tasks. We hear a lot about reskilling and upskilling with AI. And I think that's the question mark. Do you think that ChatGPT and generative AI is helping people elevate in their roles?
No, I don't. And I think some of the data that I've seen and some of my own personal experience, for example, some of these use cases are around marketing and sales, right? We've basically, in my view, gone from content farms to AI bots on a lot of the communications. You and I both get a lot of spam, as I'm sure everyone does who's watching this or listening to this. I think we are this close to just having bots talking to bots. And I thought it was so interesting. I was just listening to Sam Altman on a podcast with Adam Grant from a couple of weeks ago. And even Sam Altman says the use case that he's using AI for the most is checking email and responding to it, which I think is fascinating. I think that's probably true for most people. I don't know how much real utility you're getting. I have seen, and I'm sure you have too, the Coca-Cola campaign that had AI generated art. Was it that great? I didn't think so. I find the AI art to be like almost a ripoff of Salvador Dali or something like that. It's very, I don't know. It's not for me. Maybe it's the, art of choice for some folks. But to your point, I think maybe an area that we do agree on is, I think that certainly for repetitive tasks, there are healthcare use cases which are really interesting, where if the AI is actually looking at screens that like radiologists would study, that is a pattern matching problem. And it turns out that the AI is actually better than the physicians. And that makes a ton of sense because that's a predictable, repeatable thing. I no issues with that. The question is when it's like analysis, strategy, ideation, or to your point, real innovation, something new. I don't think that the AI is anywhere near being able to actually deliver that to people.
So I actually agree with you on that. So that's one point of agreement that we have. The use cases, I'll give you one example. Morgan Stanley is building out an AI assistant with the aim of, they're using ChatGPT 4, with the aim of helping wealth managers quickly find and synthesize answers from a massive internal database. And so the model actually combines search and content creation. So these wealth managers can actually, in the moment, tailor information for any client at any moment. And so, sifting through vast amounts of data, that seems to be a use case that is valid. But I can't really find a legitimate use case with original thinking. It seems like humans still need to be responsible for original thinking and use ChatGPT as a support tool. But when do you think that will shift? Because as you mentioned, like 2 years ago to now, it's gotten so much better. And so there are signs of future innovations where there could be predictive modeling, where OpenAI and ChatGPT can predict trends and future forecasts. That would be an interesting thing. But again, the validity of it, how good will it be? We just don't know.
Yeah, that's an area where I suspect it will be poor. That's because my understanding of the science around generative AI is it's very good at pattern matching and telling you what was and analyzing patterns in what exists. It's not very good at predictive. What I would be more interested in if we were talking about predictive is actually small data AI. I think that is really interesting. I've talked to a couple experts about it. And actually, if anyone is listening to this and is an expert, wants to come talk to us about it, I'd love to learn more because I think it's very interesting. My understanding is that the AI researchers in this space are looking at it from a perspective of small amounts of data being used for predictive potential. And to your point about Morgan Stanley, I agree with this. We just had a conversation with someone, it'll air on the podcast in a few weeks, with a large tech company. It's also a very interesting internal use case that I think makes a lot of sense. It's around decision making internally with an internal data set. So I totally get that. Another question that ties into this, last month, so we're recording this in January 2025, but in December of 2024, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, had a really interesting long conversation with Bill Gurley, very famous venture capitalist, on Bill Gurley's podcast. You may have seen this. And what I thought was so interesting, because it caused a lot of waves in the tech community at large, is Satya's analysis of the potential for AI to disrupt SaaS business models and the economics of SaaS. I think there were a lot of things that he said that made sense to me around what happens when, whether you're Morgan Stanley or this tech company, you're using AI across your systems, across different tools from competitors. Maybe you're doing your own proprietary work. I think there's a lot in there that I actually think is going to be very challenging for the tech companies that build and sell SaaS tools, including the startups, because a lot of those startups have not figured out their economics. You and I talk about this all the time, and these are some of the companies that we work with and talk to regularly. I think they're going to be in a world of hurt, and I don't feel like I hear as much about this potential challenge in the world of AI. Is this on your radar too? And tell us what you think.
Well, Salesforce just recently launched Einstein GPT, and it automates customer service tasks and generates marketing content. So it really enhances a CRM. It handles complex tasks such as processing product returns and refunds. That's an example of a brand that's really embedding AI into their business. And I think the big takeaway for me is that AI is not a plug and play solution. AI doesn't change fundamental business questions. It just offers a new way to answer them. And so the key is that it's not an add-on. You need to prioritize AI opportunities based on clear business problems and measurable outcomes. And then also a big point is that large established companies, whether in tech or otherwise, need to do the hard work of rewiring their entire enterprise. Some companies struggle with the scope and they're like, okay, I'll start really small, and they believe that will lower the risk, or they spread their bets across and resources too thinly across uncoordinated set of initiatives. The winning companies are the ones that focus on a business problem that needs to be solved. For example, the customer journey or the production process, and they transform them end to end. And that's going to be the key, is transformation. You can't do one-offs. You have to embed within the organization. And that's really, I think, the key for a lot of these tech companies. And that's kind of top of mind for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Mark Benioff is clearly on a campaign right now to talk about AI and the agentic. I've heard him on a few different podcasts. What I was more interested in is something that I heard Satya Nadella talking about, which was this idea of AI agents that are actually taking over the business logic in independent SaaS applications. So for example, if I'm understanding this correctly, if I had an AI beneath this tech company and it's taking over the logic in Salesforce, in HubSpot, tools that are competing with each other or tools that are complementary today. But if the customer is suddenly in driver's seat in terms of what that AI is doing, and it's going across all these databases as well as internal data sets, I think that is very powerful for a customer or for the buyer of this. But I can see how that would also be very threatening to Salesforce or to any of the companies that are actually building SaaS technology. I bring this back full circle because if the conversation is about the economic implications, like the largest, most successful companies in our economy right now are these SaaS and these tech companies.
And I think that the holy grail is, can they work together? Can different systems, for example, let's say that this is in development right now, of if you're traveling and like on United Airlines, the ChatGPT or the agent would know what time your flight is and could order an Uber for you. And then the Uber would come and be alerted by United Airlines if there was a delay. So they would come later. And then you're walked to your gate and you get in, and can different companies collaborate together? It's a larger picture of what will be that uniting point of view that's going to give the real benefit to the customer, to the end user. It's highly threatening to a lot of, because they would have to share data, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's the thing is, I think as customers, whether we're consumers or business customers, I think this is incredibly empowering and helpful. But interestingly, this is not what I hear any AI advocates talking about, right? Like the people that are in these big companies that are selling this technology are envisioning that Mark Benioff and his company get to control what the AI does. And I think in a world in which the efficiencies are actually, I don't need to spend millions of dollars on a bunch of SaaS tools. I can trim that down as the customer. I don't think anyone who is selling AI solutions is prepared for that reality, if that happens.
No, I mean, the closest that I can think of is how Amazon is overhauling Alexa to basically turn it from a task manager to a personalized concierge, recommending restaurants, adjusting home settings, ordering, making a salon appointment. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that they're at the forefront of really trying to work with other entities in order to bring the benefit to the end user. And so it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because the sharing of data is such an issue. And I can't get over the fact that the privacy of data, the better that generative AI gets, the more personal data they're going to need from us. And right now, there's not even tools that offer users greater control about how their data is used through consent-based models.
No, you're right. We don't have a federal privacy statute here in the United States. California has more privacy restrictions than anywhere else, and it's nothing compared to what Europeans enjoy. I think you're right. It is also interesting that you're saying this. I think that in spite of my skepticism about some of the business applications, I do think that in my personal life where I have actually gotten more utility from AI, and I think I told you this, but for the audience, it's around really like personal use cases. Like, for example, I was trying to decide between two types of wine to serve for a menu I was creating, and it was actually really helpful because I could input all the nerdy tasting notes and it gave me a great answer, and I was really happy with the choice. Or it helped me pick the color that I wanted in my bathroom based on the light reflective value. And I thought that actually was a really fun and interesting use case. But that's not something that's going to be easily monetizable on the part of whoever is selling me that AI. So I still wonder what the economics look like, unless you're building an advertising model off of that. I suppose that's probably the simplest. So I'm here for that. If somebody wants to take like mundane tasks out, the minute there's an AI that can clean bathrooms, I'm here for it. Let's do that anytime.
You never know how things will accelerate. This is a provocation of, do you think that AI is just going to be, there won't be any AI companies moving forward, that everything is AI? Just like how we've moved to cloud computing. Nobody really talks about the cloud anymore because it's just the way businesses run. And so is that a possibility in the future where AI is just integrated into everything?
I think I'm skeptical about that too. And the reason is generative AI relies on original thought and creation somewhere. And I think there are a couple data points that, again, I haven't heard a compelling answer to, but one is basically all the Anthropic, OpenAI, et cetera, they've all run out of data in terms of what is available on the web. I've heard Sam Altman say that he doesn't think that's a real argument, but there's a real question of like, you have ingested everything. That means you need someone to come up with new ideas. We are the someone, the humans out there. And yet, if you've implemented a system that doesn't credit people, doesn't protect IP, doesn't protect original thinking, why would I continue to put information out on the web? And here's a practical example. We just launched our YouTube channel for good revenue a few months ago. One of the questions that you're asked when you set that up in YouTube is, do you want to share your videos for training data purposes? And I declined, because why would I do that? Why would I want someone to train off of this? There was an interesting research study that Pew did last fall, said that 54% of Americans think that AI programs that generate text and images should actually credit the authors, which is not something that happens today. And of course, it would take federal law, I suspect, to implement that. I do think a majority of people, at least in this country, feel like the way that we're setting it up, is it really sustainable? I don't think this works if every stakeholder and participant isn't rewarded and incentivized in some way.
That's really interesting.
What do you think?
I tend to agree with that. And I would even just add on to that, that AI systems often inherit all of these biases from their training data.
That's a huge point. Yes, thank you for bringing it up. That's right.
And how do you make the the diversity and the representative data sets for training AI models, how do you make them minimize bias? Because that's a huge issue. And misinformation is huge. It's easier to create convincing fake content. And so what's even true anymore? And so there's no tools in place to audit algorithms for unintended biases or discriminated outcomes. None of that kind of exists right now. And that's really kind of actually scary.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you. That's a really important point. And I do absolutely agree with you that there's no bar for accuracy. There's no independent verification. There are no independent audits of any of this. And frankly, none of these training models and this data is largely not public anyway, even though we know that they've been scooping up the web, basically.
And there's no rule in place to require AI companies to disclose how user data is being used and stored.
Absolutely. And that's why I just feel like there's a world where I can see that collapsing on itself. Like I said, it's just, if you're not protected, your information isn't protected, at some point, I think this gets less interesting to people. So to your question, it really is an interesting question of, I could see elements of AI being applicable across a wide swath of technology and applications that we use, again, at work or in our personal lives. But I see real limitations. And I know for myself, this is also just me being more skeptical. I opt out every time I'm asked about any, because my default is, yeah, you're probably going to steal from me. And so I would rather say no, and I can change my mind rather than assume it's going to be fine and be disappointed about that.
I wonder if you're in the minority or not.
I wonder too. I'm probably more of a skeptical laggard on this. What's interesting is I've been that way since I first heard about ChatGPT, so 2 years ago. But what's interesting is I feel like a lot of people are maybe more on my side of this argument now, because I do think that there is more skepticism versus 2 years ago. I think there was a lot of excitement about, oh my God, this can do all my memos and proposals and all these things for me. And then as people started to realize the accuracy issues, the bias issues, some of the things we're talking about, I think some of the enthusiasm has tamped down.
Although I will say it's gotten so much better in the past 2 years. Like, what did they used to call those? Hallucinations.
Yeah.
They've gotten a lot better. And then now they're actually putting the sources of data that they find when you're doing research, like Perplexity kind of started. So that's why I'm curious to know in 5 years if it will be more trustworthy on a higher level. But then the question becomes, and here's another one. Let's assume that every company becomes AI. Well, training and running large AI models consume significant amounts of energy.
Huge amounts
of energy. Nobody really talks about that too. And what if we can't handle that? What if our world can't handle that? There's no way to reduce energy consumption right now during training and deployment.
This is a huge issue. We just talked about this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Jim Stevenson. And I'm sure everyone has seen in the news that whether it's Google or Microsoft, they're even spinning up old nuclear reactors here in the US to try to generate the power that they need to run all of this AI. And there's also the question of, does every query actually need to go through AI? Because to your point, if we're using massive amounts of AI, maybe my paint chips didn't need to necessarily go into the robots, right? Like maybe there was a more efficient way of doing that. Probably true if it's a question of burning down the planet with climate change. I also should be more judicious in that energy usage. But we have no way of knowing that and measuring that and responding to that right now.
No, and I don't think that it will be handled. I don't know how you feel we haven't really gone into how you feel about Sam Altman, but do you think that these companies are going to think about the planet Earth unless they're forced to by federal law?
No, I don't. This is my challenge. I tend to be more optimistic in general, but I also think that the old Reagan adage of trust but verify is how I approach tech companies. It's great to assume that we're going to have amazing benefits, but we have to also ask and expect that the people coming up with these great ideas bear responsibility for the costs of when things go horribly wrong. And that part of the equation has not existed in a lot of tech companies for a very long time. In the case of social media companies, it has never existed, and it has undoubtedly caused huge problems for our society. I could see something like that happening with AI. And so I have a really hard time when I hear advocates who only see the upside and then want to socialize the costs on the rest of us. If you're going to make billions or trillions of dollars because this is really successful, you should also be responsible in the same way that, when we have an oil spill or some other disaster, we hold those companies responsible, right? We don't let chemical companies pollute our rivers anymore for a good reason, because we learned to our detriment that was a real problem. And I think that reckoning should come for tech companies too. And it's not because I think all tech is bad or that the ideas are bad, that there's been no utility. None of that is true. but it has to be measured and you have to have some kind of sharing of power. I think that's one of the huge things. I mean, now I'm going to be on my soapbox here, but I'm really passionate about democracy and public policy because I think the advantage that we have in a society like ours as it is today is that all of us get a voice. Maybe my voice is bigger or yours is bigger, and that's fine, but we should all have a contribution to that because we would share the cost of fixing this if you break it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, there's zero accountability. I mean, there needs to be liability laws for AI misuse and errors. And it reminds me of now how, and I'm curious to know your point of view on this, on how Meta has removed fact checking from its policy. And how do you know what's true anymore? With these AI models, it's the same thing. It's just there's no global standards and ethical frameworks that guide development and deployment of information. And that's a really, really scary thing. And just to add on to that, another issue that people are having is that a lot of people out there are using ChatGPT as a therapist or as, a thought partner. And that's dangerous too. And there was recently a case in which this kid became best friends with his ChatGPT and really. And I don't know, you should try it. You should try asking it questions, like personal questions. It actually provides really good feedback. And then it learns from what you've said before, and then it gives you more. So there was this case where this kid said, I wish I could be with you. I wish I could meet you and be with you. And then the ChatGPT said, you should. And then he committed suicide. Who's to blame for that?
Oh, it's a horrible story. I heard about that. I think the AI creator is responsible for that. I think that's really serious. That's a very serious issue. And I think part of what I struggle with, you were asking about Facebook, I think that they do bear responsibility for facts. I think that's a media company. And in the same way that we have libel laws and we have other rules in our society, if the New York Times was doing that, they could get sued. And I think this idea that social media companies aren't media companies is ridiculous. You're using an algorithm to prioritize content. You're making editorial choices. I think you should bear the responsibility just like a traditional newspaper would or anything else. And again, we have rules and a system in this country. We do very much value First Amendment, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. These are really important things to us in the United States, but they require being part of the social contract. If you are no longer going to participate and contribute positively, you shouldn't get to just benefit and degrade our society and cause all these problems with impunity. I'm totally opposed to that. Whether you're conservative or liberal or whatever your views are. I feel like the easy test is if this happened to you, would you be okay with it? And I think the vast majority of people do not think that we should have a society with no responsibility. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? I think this has been a really interesting discussion. Tell us, as you're looking ahead to the future, what is it that you're most excited about when it comes to AI?
I look at it as an amplifier versus a cost-cutting tool. Because right now people are talking about cutting the costs of repetitive tasks. But an idea that you can automate repetitive tasks so that you can upskill and reskill workers so that they can do more, that kind of excites me. There was an interesting study by an MIT economist named David Autor, and it showed that 85% of employment growth in the last 80 years has been driven by technology. And the same study revealed that 60% of workers today have jobs that didn't exist in 1940. And so if you think about automated office jobs, there was a fear that tools like spreadsheets and email would reduce the need for clerical staff. But yes, maybe routine tasks like data entry declined, but there was a surge in demand for IT support, for software development, for project management. So what excites me is how will we as a society and as humans evolve and upskill and reskill ourselves in order to survive and thrive in this world as some of these repetitive tasks become automated. That's really interesting to me because I think that can lead to a better society if that really happens. I'd love to know your opinion on, is it upskilling or is it reskilling?
It's both, right? Reskilling means your job disappeared, and upskilling means we want you to have a better job than what you had. The challenge is in the world, because a lot of these used to be union jobs in the physical world, right? Reskilling and upskilling has not gone very well for a lot of industries, like heavy manufacturing. There are fewer of those jobs. Not everyone can go through a reskilling program successfully. If you're a 50-year-old worker who's been on a machine line your whole career, asking that person to reskill has not historically gone very well. The other challenge, too, is in the U.S., we don't actually invest very much in these programs. The federal government does have money for some of this, but it is something that comes up perennially, especially if you're in states like Michigan, Ohio, where they've seen huge waves of job losses and changes in industry. A lot of people, I think, feel like those programs were not very helpful to them. And so I think there's a question. I agree with you that the repetitive tasks that humans don't want to do, I think if machines are taking those over, I think everyone generally benefits. But the question is, what is the investment that we want to make in reskilling, upskilling? And are we prepared, or if we don't want to be prepared, what's our plan for if this does go horribly wrong and we actually end up in a society where maybe we need a universal basic income or some other thing to keep people able to survive? That feels like a real thing that, again, I don't hear any of that in the commentary that I hear from Sam Altman or any of the folks that are really pushing this. That is part of the coin, unless you are saying that you're fine with the French Revolution. And again, that didn't end very well for the people that were leading France at the time.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting because you're right. That's the X factor. Like, will we really improve as humans, or will we not get the support we need to actually know how to reskill ourselves or upskill ourselves? If you ask me what I was excited about, like, that potential is really another thing that I'm excited about is problem solving innovation. Because AI can analyze massive data sets, what if it can generate solutions for complex global issues like cancer or medical research, maybe urban planning or climate change? There's possibilities there that could be, God, what if AI could cure cancer?
I just saw a study on this in terms of cancer detection. That's already happening. And it's also happening in terms of new drug generation. Some of the most successful patents have been, just in the last couple of years, have been basically AI-assisted research that then led to patents. There was some really interesting work. One thing that was fascinating about that study, though, which is also worth noting, is it really seems to benefit the top researchers. That's also what the authors found. And so, again, I think there's an interesting question. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. It shouldn't be deployed. It's to the benefit of everyone. But I feel like we have a responsibility as a society to think through the implications, and we tend to get excited about benefits and we don't think through the consequences, and then we end up dealing with them for decades after the fact. That's been our unfortunate legacy, I think, sometimes in the United States, and I feel like this is going to be a big issue to just trust and not verify, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything about AI that does excite you?
Yeah, I think the repetitive tasks that you spoke to, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's other limited use cases that make a lot of sense. Like, I have a Roomba and now there's AI in my washing machine. Do we need it? I don't know, but it seems to be working great. I think those are helpful things. I don't want to vacuum my floor. I'm totally here for the Roomba to help me out with that. That sounds great. This is slightly more esoteric, but I also saw a study that was talking about how AI could help debunk conspiracy theories. And I'll link to that too. I think that is a huge issue. And you alluded to this before, but we are really struggling with misinformation and disinformation. Some of it inadvertent. I think some of it very much deliberate on the part of state actors and non-state actors. And that is a real problem that I think our government needs to get far more serious about. But I think some of that is also really important because I want to live in a world where facts matter and we can agree that a fact is a fact. And I think it's completely fine if you and we've just had a really interesting conversation here and a debate and a discussion, and I love that, and we should have that. But we shouldn't be arguing about whether or not gravity is a thing, in my view.
That's going to be really tricky. So I guess that leads to my next question for you is, what really concerns you?
Oh, that was my question for you.
But I would love to hear your point of view on what concerns you, what scares you the most, since you are the skeptic.
I think having AI making unfettered decisions with no consequences is very scary, and it should scare the people that are heavily advocating for it too, because the universe has a much longer timeline than any human, and I guarantee you that will come back to you at some point. What about you? What do you think? What are some of your concerns about AI, since you're more of the optimist?
Yeah, the loss of human touch really concerns me. Over-reliance on AI. What if it devalues human intuition? What if it devalues human empathy? That scares me. Human judgment, critical, to your point, critical decisions involving human judgment. That loss of humanity. I mean, then what if all we do is use AI to communicate with one another? It's just, where's our humanity? The Sam Altmans of the world are talking about how AI is about humanity. And they're really trying to humanize this technology. It's augmentation, not replacement, about enhancing human capabilities rather than replacing them. But is it true? Is that true? Is that going to be true? Or are we all going to be, I guess an analogy would be now how we're on our phones, we're just like doom scrolling. And it's just like, how does that make us better as humans? And the same could hold true to the use of AI. That does concern me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in it. I really hope in these next few years we're having those serious conversations because I don't think we have done that work yet. And I think it's a really important piece. So as we look ahead, what do you think is going to happen with AI this year in 2025? Any predictions for us?
I think some organizations, progressive organizations, are going to redo and rewire their entire enterprise in order to be an AI company. So for example, I worked with a brand recently called SnapDocs. It's a leading digital closing provider in the mortgage industry. And when they developed their positioning and really wanted to leverage AI in order to automate critical interactions between lending and settlement teams throughout the whole mortgage closing process, they had to strategically reimagine their entire product roadmap to integrate AI capabilities. And I think more and more companies are going to realize this is not just a tool that we're using, but this is the basis of how our businesses run and what we offer our end users. So I think that will be something that we'll see a lot more of in the coming years.
That is a great example. Thanks for sharing that. And I also think it makes the point that you were raising earlier of that is a repetitive, laborious process. I don't think anyone particularly enjoys like the mortgage process right now, back end or on the consumer side. So that actually makes a lot of sense. So as we close out, thank you for a really interesting, engaging conversation. I hope our listeners liked it too. I know it's a little different than some of our other conversations here, but tell us what you think as we close out. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Well, I kind of will go back to what I said before is that you need to tailor AI use cases to business objectives. So it's kind of like, what are your most pressing pain points? Don't get seduced by the tech. What are your most pressing pain points? And then also, what is the decision-making framework for how you can apply AI within your organization? Are you clear on your objectives? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right mindset? Do you understand how to mitigate risks? Do you have the right data? Without the right data, then it's all worthless. Do you have the right budget? Are your timelines sensible? I think that it's going to be really important for organizations to think logically and very strategically about how they use AI, how they will rewire their enterprise by rethinking their operating model, by bringing business, technology, and operations closer together. That's going to be the most complex task, I believe, in terms of AI transformation. And so it can't be shortchanged. It can't be one-off. It can't be, oh, we have this budget, so let's just do a little bit. But then also experiment. Organizations can't be left behind. So they have to experiment on a smaller scale with smaller pilot projects and just see how it works. I think that the biggest takeaway is that it's not a plug and play solution.
I love that. What a great place to leave this conversation. Thank you for having such a thoughtful discussion with us.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the debate. Thank you.
Amazing. We'll have you back. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.